She left him with nothing but a suitcase. Then his face appeared on a billboard outside her job. The corner office on the 45th floor of the Pinnacle building in Buckhead was Renee's kingdom. From this height, the city of Atlanta was a map of her victories, the glittering towers a reflection of her own ascent. On this particular Tuesday, she was reviewing marketing proofs, the heavy gloss of the paper feeling like solidified profit under her fingertips. Her Chloe blouse, the color of champagne, was crisp. Her diamond earrings, a casual 2 carats each, caught the morning light. She was untouchable. Then, a commotion from her junior executives by the floor-to-ceiling windows. "What is that?" "They've been working on that billboard for a week." Renee sighed, annoyed by the distraction. She walked over, a queen displeased with her court. Across the street, on the facade of the building that had been under construction for 2 years, a vinyl sheet the size of a god was being unfurled. It was enormous, a banner for a new king. First, a logo of a golden Ashanti stool appeared. Then the name, in elegant, powerful script, the Ashanti. A new luxury hotel then, another competitor. Then came the face, a man's face, a face she knew better than her own, a face she had screamed at, kissed, and ultimately dismissed. It was Kofi, but it was not the Kofi she had thrown out. This was not the broken man in a simple shirt. This was Kofi as the world was meant to see him. His dark skin was like polished obsidian. His eyes held the calm, steady weight of a man who owned the ground he stood on. He wore a custom-tailored suit the color of deep emerald. Beneath the powerful portrait, a simple, devastating tagline. "Welcome home," the gold standard of hospitality. Renee's breath left her body. The air in her $1 million office suddenly became thin, unbreathable. A glass of water slipped from her subordinate's hand and shattered on the Italian marble floor. Gasps, murmurs, then a single whispered question that sliced through the silence. "Renee, isn't that your ex-husband?" Every story has a beginning, a middle, and a moment when the scales of justice finally balance. And if you stick with me, I will show you how a woman who gave away her last piece of food became more powerful than a woman who lived on the 45th floor. We tell stories that matter, so subscribe and join our family. Now let me take you back to where it all began. Kofi Ansong was a man built of quiet contradictions. At 47 years old, he commanded a global hospitality empire worth an estimated $3.2 billion. His portfolio included 43 luxury hotels across 16 countries, each one a temple to his philosophy of service, a philosophy rooted in the unshakable Ghanaian principle that every guest is a king and every host is a servant to their comfort. He was from Kumasi, the heart of the Ashanti kingdom, and he carried his legacy not as a crown, but as a foundation. His hands, though they now signed contracts that shifted skylines, had once known the toil of helping his father farm cocoa. He had never forgotten the feel of rich Ghanaian earth under his fingernails. His skin was the color of dark, fertile soil after cleansing rain, and his eyes held a deep, patient intelligence. He was a tall man, broad-shouldered, but he moved with a gentle economy, a stillness that made people lean in to listen. In a world of loud boasts and flashy declarations, Kofi was a man of profound, unnerving silence. He could sit in a boardroom in Tokyo or a gala in London and, with a single measured sentence, command more respect than a dozen shouting competitors. His net worth was a number, a tool. It was not and had never been the measure of his worth. This was the source of the chasm that had opened between him and his wife, Renee. Renee lived for the measure. She was a woman sculpted by labels and validated by price tags. Her beauty was an architectural marvel, constructed with the best materials money could buy. Her hair was a cascade of Brazilian silk, installed weekly for $1,200. Her skin was maintained by a dermatologist whose waiting list was a year long at a cost of $5,000 per quarter. Her wardrobe was a curated museum of European luxury. Chanel suits for business, Hervé Leger for cocktails, a closet dedicated entirely to the punishing, exquisite art of Christian Louboutin heels. Her prized possession was a Himalayan crocodile Birkin bag, a status symbol so potent it cost more than a suburban house. It sat in her closet, a monument to her arrival. She had met Kofi a decade earlier when his empire was just beginning to catch fire. She saw the quiet power in him and mistook it for a blank canvas on which she could paint her ambitions. She saw his humility as a weakness she could manage and his wealth as a resource she could deploy. For years, it worked. She was the dazzling socialite, the face of their partnership, while he was the silent engine, the genius behind the curtain. She hosted the parties, charmed the investors, and wore the jewels. He built the empire, one authentic human connection at a time. But the more he built, the more she spent. The more genuine his success, the more performative her existence became. She began to see his quiet nature not as strength, but as a social liability. She saw his love for simple things, a walk in the park, a home-cooked meal of fufu and groundnut soup, as an embarrassment. She had clawed her way out of a middle-class existence in Decatur to this Tuxedo Park mansion, and she refused to look back. Kofi, she believed, was holding her back with his nostalgia for a past she considered beneath her. The end came on a Tuesday, the same day of the week the Billboard would later appear. It was not a dramatic explosion, but the final, weary crumbling of a rotted foundation. The argument was about a charity gala. Renee wanted to donate $1 million to have their name engraved on a new wing of a museum. It was a purely transactional act of social climbing. Kofi had refused. He had just returned from a trip to a small village near his hometown in Ghana, where he had quietly funded the construction of a new well and a small clinic. No plaque, no fanfare. That $1 million could build 3 more clinics, Renee, he said, his voice low and heavy with the sadness that went far beyond the argument. Real clinics for real people. Renee's face, a perfect mask of expensive creams and subtle fillers, contorted into a sneer. The cruelty that lived just beneath the polished surface finally broke free. Real people, she hissed, her voice dripping with contempt. You are still that little boy from the village, aren't you? Playing in the dirt. I dragged you into this world, Kofi. I put you in the right suits, taught you which forks to use. I gave you a name people respected. Without me, you are nothing. You are just a man with a strange accent and a misplaced sense of charity. It was the single most dishonest thing she had ever said. She knew on some level that he was the source of it all, but her pride, a vast and ravenous beast, could not allow that truth. We are done, Kofi, she declared, her voice cold as the marble floors. I want you out of my house. Kofi looked at her. He didn't see the woman he had once loved. He saw a stranger wearing her face, a hollow vessel filled with brand names and bitterness. He felt a profound sense of release. He nodded slowly. Okay, Renee. He went upstairs and packed a single old leather suitcase, not with his designer clothes or expensive watches, but with the few things that truly belonged to him. A faded photograph of his parents, a worn book of Ashanti proverbs, 2 simple, well-made outfits, and his first business plan, scribbled on a napkin. When he came downstairs, Renee was waiting by the door, her arms crossed over a Dior jacket. She pointed a perfectly manicured finger at the suitcase. That's it? That's all you're taking? She scoffed. Pathetic. Then came the line, the one that would echo for months, the one that was designed to sever him from his own identity, to strip him of his history and his worth, the cruelest dismissal. You are nothing without my name behind you. Go back to whatever dust you came from. She opened the grand 10-foot-tall door and gestured him out. He stepped onto the perfectly manicured lawn of the estate he had paid for. The door clicked shut behind him with the finality of a vault ceiling. Kofi Ansong, the billionaire, stood on the side of the road with a single suitcase and the clothes on his back. He could have made a single phone call, and a black car would have appeared in minutes to whisk him away to one of his own penthouse suites. He could have called his lawyers and begun the process of surgically removing Renee from his life and his finances. But he did neither. He stood there, listening to the silence, and a strange idea began to form. For years, he had been insulated by his wealth. He had been surrounded by people who said yes, people who wanted something. Renee's final venomous words, while untrue, had struck a dissonant chords. Who was he, really, without the empire? What was his worth as a man if he had nothing to offer anyone? He wanted to know. He needed to know. So he started walking. He walked for hours, away from the manicured lawns of Tuxedo Park, through the bustling streets of Midtown, and into the quieter, older neighborhoods of Atlanta. He walked until his expensive shoes began to pinch and the sun beat down on his head. He found himself on a residential street in a neighborhood that reminded him a little of the towns outside Kumasi. Small, neat houses with well-tended gardens and wide front porches. He was tired. His soul was tired. He sat down on a low brick wall, placed his suitcase beside him, and simply watched the world go by. He looked like any other man down on his luck. His simple trousers were wrinkled, his shirt was damp with sweat, and his face was a mask of weary contemplation. He sat there for an hour. People passed, some glanced at him with curiosity, others with suspicion. No one spoke. He was invisible. He was, for the first time in 20 years, just a man on the side of the road. Then a voice, gentle but firm, cut through the afternoon heat. It was a voice that sounded like home. "My son, the sun is too hot for waiting. Come, sit in the shade." Kofi looked up. On the porch of the small, pale blue house across the street sat an old woman in a rocking chair. She was the picture of serene grace. Her hair was a crown of silver and white, braided into an elegant, simple style. Her skin was the color of rich, dark chocolate, etched with the fine lines of a life fully lived, a map of 74 years of laughter and sorrow. Her hands, resting in her lap, were the hands of a worker, strong, capable, and gentle. She wore a simple dress made of brightly patterned fabric, and no makeup adorned her face. Her beauty was not something she wore, it was something she radiated, a warmth that seemed to emanate from her very core. This was Mama Abena. She had retired from her life as a market trader in Kumasi and come to live with her daughter in Atlanta. But a trader's spirit never truly retires. So every day, from her front porch, she sold the best kinky in the city. The tangy, fermented smell of it hung in the air, a delicious, invisible welcome mat. Kofi hesitated. It was an offer of unconditional kindness from a complete stranger. It was something he hadn't experienced in a very long time. She saw his hesitation and smiled, a gesture that lit up her entire face. "Do not worry, I will not bite. The porch is for sharing. Come." This was the kind invitation, the specific, unique words that would become a sacred callback. He stood up, picked up his suitcase, and crossed the street. As he walked up the short path to her porch, the smell of the kinky grew stronger, mingling with the scent of fried fish and the sharp, enticing aroma of shito, the spicy black pepper sauce that was its essential companion. It was the smell of his childhood. He stepped onto the cool, shaded concrete of the porch. "Thank you, Mama," he said, his voice a little hoarse. "There is nothing to thank," she replied, gesturing to another rocking chair. "A little shade costs nothing to give. Sit, rest yourself." He did. And for the first time since leaving that grand, empty mansion, Kofi Ansong felt like he might just be home. The weeks that followed settled into a quiet, life-altering rhythm. Kofi, in his self-imposed exile from his own life, found a small, clean room to rent in the neighborhood, paying cash from the emergency fund he always kept separate from his digital fortune. He told no one who he was. He introduced himself simply as Kofi, a man from Ghana, new to the area and looking for work. To the world he had left behind, he had simply vanished. That world, however, did not forget him. It was Renee's world now, and she was his chief narrator. Her story, spun over brunches at the St. Regis and whispered during cocktail hours at the Cherokee Town and Country Club, was a masterpiece of curated victimhood. The first beat of her campaign was a carefully staged lunch with three of their most influential friends. Renee, dressed in a somber but impeccably tailored Victoria Beckham dress, dabbed at her dry eyes with a silk handkerchief. I just don't know what happened, she lamented, her voice a practiced whisper of sorrow. He became distant. The business, it was failing. He made some terrible investments, lost a fortune. He was too proud to tell me, of course. The women leaned in, their faces masked of sympathetic concern, their eyes gleaming with the thrill of high society gossip. He just broke, Renee continued, delivering the killing blow. He drained our joint accounts and disappeared, left me with nothing but debts and a broken heart. It was a lie, of course, a complete fabrication, but it was a simple, believable story, and it spread like wildfire. The narrative took hold. Kofi Ansong, the quiet genius, had flown too close to the sun and crashed. Renee, his brave, beautiful wife, was the tragic survivor. The second beat of the conflict found Kofi directly. He had taken to long walks, exploring the city on foot, rediscovering the streets he had only ever seen through the tinted windows of a Maybach. One afternoon, his path took him through Phipps Plaza, a place he and Renee had often frequented. He was dressed in his simple, anonymous clothes. As he passed a high-end boutique, a man he recognized came out. It was a former business associate, a man named Charles, who had once begged Kofi for an investment. Charles saw him and his eyes widened. He saw the plain clothes, the weary look on Kofi's face, and his mind immediately filled in the blanks with the story Renee had so carefully crafted. Charles's face softened into an expression of profound pity. He walked over to Kofi, his hand outstretched. "Kofi, my man," he said, his voice oozing with condescending sympathy. "I heard what happened. Tough break." "Tough. Really tough." Kofi simply nodded, curious to see how this would play out. Charles reached into his wallet, pulled out a crisp $100 bill, and tried to press it into Kofi's hand. "Here," he said, his voice low. "Go get yourself a decent meal. If you need anything at all, don't hesitate to, well, you know." The unspoken end to that sentence was, "Lose my number." He was performing charity, not offering help. The humiliation was a physical thing, a hot flush that rose up Kofi's neck. This man, who had once fawned over him for a fraction of his attention, was now offering him pocket money. Kofi looked at the bill, then back at Charles's pitying face. With a quiet dignity that Charles completely misinterpreted as shame, Kofi gently pushed his hand away. "Thank you, Charles, but I am all right." He walked away, leaving the man standing there, confused and a little offended that his grand gesture of pity had been refused. The final beat was digital and therefore permanent. Renee posted a photo of herself on Instagram, silhouetted against the sunset from the balcony of their mansion. The caption was a masterclass in passive aggression. Sometimes you have to be strong enough to let go of what's weighing you down. The past is the past. Embracing my new chapter, lighter and freer than ever. Hashtag survivor. Hashtag new beginnings. Hashtag cutting dead weight. Their entire social circle liked and commented with messages of support, emojis of praying hands and flexed biceps. They were praising her for her strength in abandoning a man they all believed was now destitute. Through all of this, Kofi had one anchor, one place of solace: Mama Abena's porch. Every evening, after his long walks, he would find his way back to the pale blue house. He would help her with small chores, sweeping the porch, carrying her heavy pots inside, weeding her small garden of herbs and peppers, and every evening she would feed him. It was never a transaction, it was a ritual. She would set a small table, and they would eat together. The meals were simple but profound, kinky, always kinky, with fried fish or a rich, savory stew, and always a spoonful of her fiery, complex Shito. Their conversations unfolded slowly, like a rare flower. At first, they were practical. She asked about his family back home. He asked about her journey to America. He learned she had been a formidable trader in Kajeya Market, the bustling heart of Kumasi, selling fabrics for 50 years. She could calculate complex sums in her head faster than a machine and could read the heart of a customer with a single glance. Then their talks deepened, becoming personal. She told him stories of her late husband, a good, quiet man who loved music. Kofi, in turn, found himself speaking of his own parents, of the lessons his father had taught him about patience and the earth. He never spoke of his wealth or his company, and he never spoke of Renee. He simply presented himself as he was in that moment, a man adrift. Mama Abena never pried. She possessed a deep, abiding wisdom that knew the difference between curiosity and compassion. She saw the sadness in his eyes, the weight he carried on his broad shoulders. She did not need to know the details of the wound to know that it needed healing. Her kindness was the medicine. She would watch him eat, a small, satisfied smile on her face. Food is not just for the belly, my son, she told him one evening as he savored a bite of perfectly fried snapper. It is for the soul. When a person's soul is hungry, their body cannot be full. In her presence, Kofi felt the noise of his old life fade away. The gossip, the pity, the performative sympathy, it all became distant, irrelevant. On this porch, a man's worth was not measured by his bank account or his social standing. It was measured by his character, by the respect he showed his elders, by the quiet way he listened. One evening, Kofi arrived at her porch later than usual. He had just seen Renee's Instagram post, forwarded to him by a concerned cousin. The phrase, cutting dead weight, had burrowed under his skin, a small, sharp splinter of pain. His face must have shown it because Mama Abena looked up from her pot and her smile faded slightly. "You look tired today, Kofi," she said gently. "I am, Mama, a little tired." She nodded, not asking for more. "Sit, rest. Food is almost ready." That night, she delivered the proverb. She looked out at the setting sun, her eyes distant, as if seeing all the way back to Ghana. "In my village," she said, her voice soft, "the old ones teach us. The tree that bends in wind outlasts the one that boasts. Remember that, my son. The proud, stiff tree cracks in the storm. The humble one that knows how to bend is still standing when the sun returns." He looked at this woman, this queen, on a simple porch, and felt a wave of gratitude so powerful it almost brought him to his knees. She was giving him more than food. She was giving him wisdom. She was reminding him of who he was. She was teaching him how to bend. The day of the pivotal gift arrived without fanfare. It was a Wednesday, hot and humid, the kind of Atlanta day where the air itself feels heavy. Business had been slow for Mama Abena. The oppressive heat kept most people indoors. By late afternoon, she had sold only a few orders of kenki. As the sun began its slow descent, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, she packed up her things. She had one portion left. A single, perfectly wrapped ball of kenki, one piece of fried tilapia, and a small container of shito. This was her dinner. It was all she had in the house for the evening. Her daughter, a nurse, was working a double shift at the hospital and wouldn't be home until morning. She sat in her rocking chair, ready to eat, when she saw Kofi walking up the street. His shoulders were slumped, his pace slow and heavy. It was the most defeated she had ever seen him. Earlier that day, he had tried to apply for a simple manual labor job, wanting to feel the dignity of an honest day's work. The foreman, a man half his age, had taken one look at his soft hands and laughed him out of the office. "Go on, old man," he'd said. "This is hard work." The dismissal, so casual and reflexive, had stung more than Charles's pity. Kofi reached the porch and tried to force a smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Good evening, Mama." Mama Abena looked at him, her gaze missing nothing. She saw past the tired smile to the deep ache in his spirit. Her own hunger, a simple physical need, vanished. It was replaced by a more urgent imperative. His soul was hungry. Her mind, the sharp mind of a market trader, did a quick, silent calculation. This was her last meal. There was no more. But then she looked at his face again, and the calculation changed. This was not a question of inventory. This was a question of humanity. The decision was made in an instant. The narration must now slow, every micro action described. Her movements became deliberate, a ceremony of grace. She pushed herself up from the rocking chair, her old joints protesting softly. She walked over to the small table where her dinner was laid out. Her hands, wrinkled and strong, reached for the plate. She paused for a fraction of a second, her fingers hovering over the warm dish. This was her sustenance, her comfort. Then, with the resolve as solid as the Ghanaian earth, she picked it up. She turned to Kofi. She did not say, "Are you hungry?" or "Would you like this?" She presented it as a fact, an inevitability, a truth. She held the plate out to him. The kinky, unwrapped from its corn husk, was steaming gently, its fermented aroma a comforting tang in the air. The tilapia, fried to a perfect golden brown, was crisp and inviting. The dollop of shito was a dark, glossy promise of heat and flavor. "You will eat," she said. It was not a question. It was a command from a higher authority, the authority of compassion. Kofi stared at the plate, then at her face. He knew. He had seen her slow day. He knew this was her own dinner. "No, Mama," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I cannot. That is for you." "Nonsense," she said, her voice gentle but unyielding. "I am an old woman. I do not need much. You are a young man. You need your strength." She pushed the plate more firmly towards him. He looked down at the food, the very scent of which was a balm to his bruised spirit. He was overwhelmed. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the crumpled $100 bill that Charles had tried to give him. It was the only money he had on him. "Please, Mama," he insisted, his voice cracking. "Let me pay you for it. Please, take this." He held out the money. She looked at the bill in his hand and then back into his eyes. She slowly shook her head, and a look of profound disappointment crossed her features. She gently, deliberately pushed his hand and the money away. This was the first refusal. "No, my son," she said, her voice soft but laced with steel. "Food is not for counting. A gift is not a debt." Kobe's desperation grew. He couldn't bear the thought of taking her last meal without compensating her. It felt wrong, a violation of her generosity. "But Mama, you don't understand," he pleaded. "I must. I have to give you something for it." He tried to press the money into her hand again, his fingers closing around hers. She pulled her hand back as if his money had burned her. Her expression was now one of genuine hurt. Her voice when she spoke was quiet, but it carried the weight of a lifetime of principle. This was the second refusal, the one that would break him. "To offer money for a gift is to say it was not a gift," she said, her words precise and devastating. "You are telling me my kindness has a price? Is that what you think of me?" The word struck him with the force of a physical blow. He realized in that horrifying moment that in his attempt to preserve his own pride, he was insulting hers. He was trying to turn an act of pure, unconditional love into a simple transaction, reducing her grace as to the level of Renee's world, where everything and everyone had a price. His hands began to tremble. The $100 bill felt like poison in his palm. He looked at her face, at the hurt in her wise old eyes, and something inside him shattered. The dam of his composure, which had held against Renee's cruelty, against the world's pity and contempt, finally broke under the sheer, unadulterated force of this old woman's goodness. A sob escaped his throat, a raw, ragged sound. His eyes, which had remained dry through all his trials, burned and then overflowed. Tears streamed down his face, hot and unstoppable. He sank into the chair, covering his face with his hands, and wept. He wept for his lost love, for his broken pride, for the loneliness that had been his constant companion. But mostly, he wept with gratitude for the woman who had seen him, a stranger on the side of the road, and offered him not just shade, not just food, but his own humanity served up on a simple plate. He cried for a long time, the porch bearing silent witness to the unburdening of a man's soul. Mama Abena did not rush to comfort him. She let the storm pass. She stood beside him, a still, quiet presence. When his sobs finally subsided into shuddering breaths, she placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. He looked up at her, his face streaked with tears, his eyes red and raw. She offered him a small, watery smile. "It is only kinky," she said, her voice the essence of simple, devastating truth. "But it is made with love." She pushed the plate onto the table in front of him. "Now," she said, her voice returning to its normal, practical warmth. "Eat before it gets cold." And Kofi Ansong, the billionaire, ate the most valuable meal of his life. The meal was a turning point. As Kofi ate the kinky, each bite felt like a sacrament. He was not just consuming food, he was internalizing the lesson Mama Abena had taught him. True wealth was not in what you owned, but in what you could give away. True strength was not in resisting the storm, but in knowing how to bend. When he finished, he thanked her, his voice clear and steady for the first time in weeks. The exhaustion was gone, replaced by a quiet, unshakable resolve. He had been testing himself, waiting for a sign. Mama Abena's gift was not a sign, it was a revelation. He walked back to his small rented room and made a phone call. It was to his second in command, a sharp, loyal executive named David. "David," he said, his voice calm and full of its old authority, "it's me. I'm coming back. We're launching the Atlanta project, and we're moving up the timeline. I want it done in 1 month." On the other end of the line, there was a stunned silence, followed by sputtering relief. "Kofi, my God, where have you been? We thought—" Renee said— "I know what Renee said," Kofi cut in, his voice devoid of anger. It was simply a statement of fact. "She was mistaken. Now listen to me. I'm sending you an address. I want you to discreetly purchase the building across the street from it, the one that's been under construction. Buy the whole thing, whatever the cost. And I want the largest billboard in the city on its facade. I'll handle the creative myself." The mogul was back, but he was a different man. The quiet confidence was still there, but it was now underpinned by a foundation of profound humility. He was no longer just building hotels. He was building monuments to the philosophy Mama Abena had embodied, the philosophy of unconditional hospitality. The next month was a blur of controlled, explosive activity. Kofi moved into a temporary headquarters, directing a whirlwind of construction, marketing, and design. He poured all of his focus into the Ashanti, his new flagship hotel in Atlanta. It would not just be a luxury hotel, it would be the physical manifestation of his Ghanaian roots, a place where every guest, regardless of their station, felt the warmth of a true welcome. He continued to visit Mama Abena every evening. He did not tell her what he was doing. To her, he was still just Kofi, the man who helped with her chores and shared her meals. The ritual was too precious to disrupt with talk of business and billions. It was his anchor to the real world, the one that mattered. Meanwhile, Renee was at the apex of her reign. With Kofi gone, she had successfully rebranded herself as the sole architect of their success. She was celebrated in society magazines as a resilient, brilliant businesswoman. She was living her best life, a life of applause and admiration, utterly unaware of the storm, gathering just across the street from her office. And then came the Tuesday, the day of the reveal. From her 45th floor office, Renee watched it happen. The unfurling of the banner, the golden stool, the name, the Ashanti, and then his face, larger than life, powerful, serene, a king returning to his throne. The tagline, "Welcome Home," felt like a personal message, a declaration that the home he had built was not the empty mansion she occupied, but this new, towering monument to his vision. Her phone began to ring, then buzz, then vibrate incessantly. Text messages, emails, Slack notifications. Her colleagues stared at her, their faces a mixture of shock, confusion, and dawning realization. The story she had so carefully constructed, the narrative of her victimhood, had just been demolished by a 50-foot-tall photograph. The truth spread even faster than her lies had. The business world connected the dots in a matter of hours. Kofi Ansong wasn't broken. He had been building. He hadn't vanished. He had been planning. Renee wasn't a survivor. She was a fraud. The aftermath was swift and brutal. The company she worked for, a prestigious consulting firm whose currency was reputation, could not tolerate the scandal. She was called into her boss's office that afternoon. There was no sympathy. She was demoted, stripped of her corner office and her client-facing responsibilities, and reassigned to a windowless room in the sub-basement, tasked with archiving old files. Her kingdom had shrunk from a panoramic view of the city to 4 beige walls. Her social circle evaporated overnight. The friends who had listened so sympathetically to her lies now crossed the street to avoid her. She was a liability. Dead weight. 2 days later, Kofi walked up to Mama Abena's porch. He was not wearing a suit. He was wearing the same simple trousers and shirt he always wore. He sat down in his usual chair. "Mama," he said, his voice full of a gentle warmth, "I have something to tell you." He told her everything about his company, his wealth, about Renee, about his self-imposed exile. He told her that her kindness had saved him, not from poverty, but from a poverty of the spirit. She listened patiently, her hands folded in her lap. When he was finished, she simply nodded, as if it was the most natural story in the world. "The heart knows what the eyes cannot see," she said softly. "I always knew you were a king. A man's royalty is in his character, not his pocket." Kofi smiled. Then he made his offer. "Mama, I want to give you everything. A new house, a car with a driver, a team of chefs to cook for you. You will never have to work another day in your life. Anything you want, it is yours." He expected her to be shocked, perhaps to cry with joy. Instead, she laughed. It was a deep, musical laugh that came from her belly, a laugh full of love and gentle amusement. "Oh, my sweet boy," she said, wiping a tear of mirth from her eye. "You have learned so much, but you still have a little to learn." She gestured around her at the simple porch, the worn rocking chairs, the fragrant pots. "My wealth is here, Kofi. My wealth is the sun on my face in the morning, the smell of my kinky, the neighbors who stop to talk. What would I do in a big, empty house? Be lonely?" It was a rejection of his money, but a profound acceptance of him. It was the final lesson. Grace cannot be purchased. "I will not take your house or your cars," she continued, her expression turning serious, though her eyes still twinkled. "But," she said, wagging a finger at him, "I will come to the party for your new hotel, and I expect you to have a special place for me to sit." Kofi felt a wave of love for this woman so immense it almost took his breath away. She had asked for nothing but his presence, his respect. It was an intangible gift, more valuable than any mansion. "Mama," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "I have already saved the best place for you." He paused, then delivered the news. "I have named the penthouse suite, the largest, most beautiful room in the entire hotel, after you. It is called the Mama Abena Suite. Its guests will be treated with the highest honor because they will be staying in the home of a queen." Now, it was Mama Abena's turn for her eyes to well with tears. She reached out and cupped his face in her strong, warm hands. "You are a good boy, Kofi Ansong," she whispered. "You are your father's son." Months passed. The Ashanti Hotel became the new heart of Atlanta's luxury scene, celebrated not just for its opulence, but for its soul. Renee, meanwhile, had hit rock bottom. Fired from her basement job for her sour attitude, she was now working for a temp agency, taking whatever gigs she could get. One evening, she was assigned to a catering team for a private event. The location, a cruel twist of fate, was the Ashanti. Her task was to serve hors d'oeuvres in the main ballroom. Dressed in a cheap, ill-fitting black uniform, she moved through the glittering crowd, a ghost in the palace she once dreamed of ruling. Her gaze kept drifting to the grand staircase where a special reception was being held on the mezzanine for the guest of honor. Her supervisor, a stern woman with a clipboard, barked an order at her. "You, take this tray of champagne up to the VIP suite, the Mama Abena suite, and be quick about it." The name was like a slap. Renee's hands trembled as she took the heavy silver tray. She rode a service elevator, her reflection in the polished steel walls a cruel mockery of the woman she used to be. She walked down a silent, plush corridor and knocked softly on the door of the penthouse. The door was opened by Kofi's assistant. He led her into the main room, and there, sitting in a beautiful armchair, holding court and laughing with a group of admiring guests, was Mama Abena. She was dressed in a stunning gown of royal blue kente cloth, looking every inch the queen she was. Her eyes met Renee's. For a moment, there was no recognition. She saw only a tired-looking server standing awkwardly with the tray. Then her gaze sharpened. She saw the flicker of shame, the ghost of arrogance, the deep, hollow pain in Renee's eyes. She recognized the woman who had hurt her boy. Renee froze, expected to be thrown out, to be humiliated. She braced herself for a torrent of righteous anger. But Mama Abena did not summon security. She did not raise her voice. She saw not a villain, but a broken person. She saw a woman standing uncomfortably, weary and defeated, and she responded with the only instinct she knew: grace. She excused herself from her guests and walked slowly over to Renee. She looked at her eyes full of a compassion so pure it was disarming. Then she spoke the sacred words, the callback that would offer a redemption Renee knew she did not deserve. "My daughter," Mama Abena said, her voice soft as velvet. "The sun is too hot for standing. Come, sit in the shade." Renee's carefully constructed composure dissolved. The silver tray crashed to the floor, glasses shattering on the thick carpet. She crumpled, her body racked with sobs of shame and regret. She had given a man everything she thought mattered: status, connections, a brand name. And this old woman, with nothing but a porch and a pot of kinky, had given him the world. The closing image of our story is not of Renee's tears, but of a scene of pure, unadulterated joy. A few weeks later, it is the grand opening of the Ashanti Hotel. A massive crowd is gathered. At the front, a red ribbon is stretched across the grand entrance. Holding the ceremonial scissors is Mama Abena. She is radiant in traditional Ghanaian attire, a figure of immense dignity and power. In her other hand, she holds a small, leaf-wrapped piece of kinky, a reminder of the true currency of her kingdom. Standing beside her, beaming with the love and pride that lights up the entire city block, is Kofi Ansong. He leans down and whispers something in her ear that makes her throw her head back and laugh. That deep musical laugh. She snips the ribbon and the crowd erupts in applause. A new empire has been dedicated, founded not on concrete and steel, but on a single act of kindness on a hot afternoon. Every tale has a lesson, and our channel never forgets. The tree that bends in wine outlasts the one that boasts. The proud and brittle will always crack in the storm, but the humble, who know the value of shade and a shared meal, will not only survive, they will inherit the earth. Thank you for joining our family. If this story touched your heart, subscribe and be the first to hear the next one. We have so many more to tell.